Let us meet Kyle. He firmly believes in absolute justice, relentless hard work, and the incredibly naive idea that if he simply remains a good boy, his boss will eventually notice all of his dedicated efforts and hand him a lucrative promotion. Kyle has just finished eagerly reading yet another popular leadership book that is heavily advising him to be completely vulnerable and absolutely sincere in the ruthless corporate workplace. Listen closely, my naive friend, because adopting that exact mindset is the absolute shortest path to being completely walked all over by absolutely everyone else around you. The undeniable truth is that true power is never about simply being the nicest or the most accommodating person sitting quietly in the meeting room. Instead, real influence is entirely about maintaining strict control over valuable resources and carefully managing the exact way that other people perceive you on a daily basis. The real world operates as a relentless high-stakes game, and while Kyle patiently sits around waiting for a polite invitation to join the head table, other more ruthless individuals are already aggressively seating their own loyal people in those positions of authority. Today we are going to carefully break down 10 undeniable laws that they absolutely refuse to teach you in traditional business schools, simply because these rules are far too brutally honest to ever be printed inside any official academic textbook. One day, Kyle foolishly decided to step out of his comfort zone and show some unprompted initiative in the workplace. During an important meeting, he confidently presented a brilliant idea that was clearly vastly superior to his own manager's proposal, and he made the fatal error of doing this completely publicly in front of the entire team. Kyle naively expects thunderous applause and immediate recognition for his sheer brilliance, but instead of praise, he instantly receives a one-way ticket straight into a permanent state of cold professional limbo. The massive mistake that Kyle made was deeply bruising the fragile ego of the exact person that his entire career progression heavily depends upon. You must deeply understand that the concept of power within any corporate structure is actually a very fragile thing. Your boss desperately needs to always feel like he is the absolute smartest person sitting in the room, even if it is completely obvious to absolutely everyone else that he is definitely not. If you simply let him feel like a total genius by allowing him to take the full credit for using your excellent work, you will inevitably become his most trusted right-hand man. However, if you foolishly try to prove that you are significantly better than him, you immediately become his main operational threat, which he will brutally eliminate at the very first available opportunity. Kyle absolutely loves to talk and constantly shares every little detail of his daily life with anyone who will simply stand there and listen to him. He eagerly tells all of his office colleagues about his grand future plans, explaining exactly how he painstakingly made his latest report, and even revealing precisely where he plans to invest his hard-earned money. He genuinely thinks that by being so incredibly open and totally transparent, he is successfully building strong bonds of deep professional trust. In harsh reality, he is just freely handing out loaded metaphorical weapons that will eventually be used directly against him by his own peers. You must realize that the more you talk and constantly overshare your inner thoughts, the more incredibly ordinary and highly vulnerable you ultimately appear to the people listening. You must recognize that true absolute power genuinely loves the profound sound of complete and total silence. People who consciously choose to speak very little naturally seem vastly stronger and deeply more mysterious to absolutely everyone else around them. Every single spoken word that Kyle carelessly lets slip out of his mouth is either potential dirt that can be used later or a brilliant idea that someone else will eagerly steal. Always remember that providing a remarkably short and direct answer is absolutely always much better and far more effective than delivering an exhaustive and incredibly long lecture. You must diligently learn to comfortably hold a heavy, dramatic pause, while others awkwardly and nervously attempt to fill that exact quiet space with their own deeply hidden personal secrets. Kyle genuinely does not seem to care at all about the nasty gossip or the quiet whispers that his colleagues constantly share about him behind his back in the office break room. He arrogantly and incorrectly assumes that his incredibly hard work and excellent daily results will naturally speak entirely for themselves without any extra effort on his part. Making that specific naive assumption is an absolutely massive and potentially career-ending mistake for any ambitious professional to ever make. In the highly competitive and ruthless world of corporate power, Your carefully crafted personal reputation is literally the absolute only protective shield standing directly between you and being completely fired from your job. If the important people around you simply think of you as nothing more than a quiet and highly reliable worker, then you will absolutely remain stuck as a basic worker forever, without any hope of advancement. You must carefully ensure that your incredibly powerful personal reputation always manages to enter any room long before you actually physically step foot inside of it. You must intentionally create an intimidating aura around yourself as a brilliant individual who effortlessly solves entirely impossible problems, or as someone who is exceptionally dangerous to ever cross or actively oppose. Always remember that a deeply ruined professional reputation is exactly like a tiny fatal crack slowly forming in an otherwise completely impenetrable heavy titanium armor shell. Kyle must quickly learn to fiercely protect his own personal name at absolutely all costs, simply because that strong name alone can magically open heavy corporate doors that remain permanently locked for just regular, compliant, good employees. The harsh reality is that the entire ruthless world only ever truly judges you based entirely upon exactly what it can visibly see happening right in front of its own eyes. If you are simply not physically and socially visible to the important people around you, then in the grand corporate scheme, you essentially do not even exist at all. Kyle stubbornly continues to sit entirely alone in the dark back corner of the office, quietly doing his heavy workload while foolishly hoping to be ultimately rewarded for his pure and quiet modesty. But the brutal truth is that extreme modesty is really only a useful virtue for those unfortunate individuals who absolutely possess no other competitive advantages to leverage in life. In a chaotic modern world that is completely crowded with an endless stream of distracting information, you must actively choose to be incredibly bright, or perhaps even slightly scandalous, just to be noticed. Always keep in mind that it is vastly better to become a highly visible target of harsh public criticism than to simply be completely and utterly ignored by the people making the big decisions. True influence and absolute power will always naturally gravitate directly toward those bold individuals who confidently place themselves directly inside the brightest, most visible public spotlight. Therefore, Kyle must quickly learn how to fundamentally transform his entire professional persona into a highly attractive, completely irresistible, and incredibly powerful social magnet. Even if he is simply tasked with presenting a terribly boring, entirely routine financial report, he absolutely must deliver it with such incredible dramatic flair that people will eagerly talk about it for an entire week. You must never simply allow your unique identity to quietly dissolve into the massive, faceless gray crowd of regular employees, because that very same crowd is simply used as cheap disposable fuel to relentlessly drive other people's grand ambitions. Kyle is also unfortunately a massive perfectionist who firmly believes in flawlessly completing every single minute detail of his daily work without any outside assistance. Kyle completely exhausts himself and comes home entirely drained every single night, while his seemingly lazy colleague, who actually spent over half the working day casually drinking coffee, happily receives all of the lucrative financial bonuses. The exact reason this seemingly unfair situation happens on a daily basis is simply because that specific colleague deeply understands and masterfully applies the powerful art of how to properly delegate heavy tasks to others. You must strategically learn to effectively use the collected wisdom, the valuable time, and the intense physical efforts of other surrounding people to accomplish your own massive goals. You must firmly understand that doing this is absolutely not cruel workplace exploitation, but rather it is the purest and highest form of ultimate operational efficiency. Your ultimate professional success should always deliberately look incredibly effortless to the outside observer, appearing exactly as if you had simply snapped your fingers to magically make it all happen instantly. Absolutely no one should ever be allowed to see the massive crowd of dedicated people who actually helped you accomplish all of the heavy lifting along your path to the very top. Kyle absolutely must quickly learn how to effectively use various smart assistants, highly paid consultants, and powerful office allies whose impressive personal achievements he can eventually leverage as his own. Because at the absolute end of the long working day, All of the public glory always goes directly to the heroic person proudly holding the grand flag, and definitely not to the invisible worker quietly digging the dirty trench. Currently, Kyle makes the terrible professional mistake of being constantly and completely available to absolutely everyone in the busy office at all times of the day. He frantically rushes to answer every single incoming corporate email in exactly 2 minutes flat, and he always happily shows up for every single casual office coffee break without fail. Kyle mistakenly believes that his constant, unending availability to his coworkers is a profound and noble demonstration of deep, professional loyalty. In harsh corporate reality, this exact eager behavior is actively and rapidly causing the complete devaluation of his own personal and professional worth. You must always remember the fundamental economic rule that absolutely anything, which is simply far too common, immediately becomes incredibly cheap and easily replaceable. If you are quite literally always standing around and eagerly waiting in the office, you eventually just become part of the background decor, exactly like a forgotten potted plant sitting quietly in the dusty corner. True corporate power and lasting influence fundamentally require maintaining a very strict and carefully calculated physical and emotional distance from the everyday regular crowd. Kyle absolutely must learn the critical professional skill of completely disappearing into the background shadows at the exact right moment. The moment that you intentionally choose to become totally unavailable, your perceived personal value instantly skyrockets to incredible new heights. Other people will immediately start to wonder exactly what important secret things you are doing, and they will naturally attribute an incredibly high level of importance to your limited time. You must never allow yourself to simply be a convenient and completely easy option for absolutely everyone else around you. Instead, you must fiercely transform yourself into a highly scarce and incredibly valuable resource that other people literally have to aggressively fight each other to obtain. Kyle has sadly become an incredibly predictable and entirely transparent individual in his daily corporate routine. Absolutely everyone in the entire building already knows exactly how he will emotionally react to harsh managerial criticism or to a completely new and sudden project deadline. This dangerous level of extreme predictability unfortunately makes him a perfectly safe and incredibly easy target for constant psychological manipulation by his ambitious peers. You must understand that human beings naturally possess a deep biological desire to fully control their surrounding environment by accurately predicting everything that happens within it. However, if you suddenly decide to act chaotically or seemingly illogically, you immediately and forcefully pull the comfortable rug of certainty right out from under your startled opponents. Kyle absolutely must quickly learn how to deliberately make highly unexpected and surprisingly bold professional moves on the complex corporate chessboard. Injecting just a little bit of carefully calculated unpredictability naturally makes the ambitious people around you deeply nervous, and much more importantly, it forcefully demands that they respect your strict personal boundaries. Because when your aggressive corporate rivals simply do not know exactly what brilliant or chaotic action you will take next, they will always instinctively choose to keep a very safe and highly respectful distance from you. Instead of constantly and desperately running around the office, actively chasing after every single small opportunity, Kyle must learn to magically make those massive opportunities aggressively chase after him. The absolute golden rule of power is that whenever you strategically force another person to comfortably act and reveal their hand first, you instantly become the absolute dominant master of the entire situation. You must always creatively design specific situations and highly favorable conditions where your competitive opponent is practically forced to physically and emotionally come directly to you. This strategic bait could easily be an incredibly lucrative financial offer, or it could alternatively be a very subtle and highly dangerous hint of an impending corporate conflict. You must absolutely realize that the very second they willingly step foot onto your carefully controlled home territory, they have effectively already lost exactly half of the entire battle. Kyle no longer ever pathetically asks anyone for any small favors or quick promotions, but instead he brilliantly creates a complex environment where absolutely everyone desperately comes and asks him for help. Building this exact type of magnetic social dynamic is what provides true and undeniably powerful leverage during absolutely any serious professional negotiation. Just take a good long look at the incredibly transformed Kyle. standing here right now. He completely refuses to ever again desperately slump his tired shoulders heavily underneath the massive, crushing weight of other regular people's daily expectations. Instead, he now speaks very softly, with a cold, absolute confidence, and he certainly no longer tries to pathetically please absolutely everyone who happens to cross his path. His entire professional life dramatically changed forever, but definitely not because he suddenly became some soft, magical, better version of himself, according to the fake, wealthy internet gurus. It completely and utterly changed, simply because he finally, deeply understood the cold, hard truth that absolute power is never freely given away, but rather it must always be aggressively taken. You must clearly understand that adopting this exact powerful mindset is absolutely not about suddenly transforming into a ruthless, dark, and evil corporate villain. Instead, this transformation is entirely about finally standing up for yourself and completely stopping your old, terrible habit of acting like a helpless, weak piece of prey for the hungry corporate predators. Kyle now completely knows and fully accepts that absolute honesty is simply a highly useful tactical tool, and it is definitely never a forced moral obligation that he must blindly follow. He strategically uses these 10 undeniable laws to fiercely protect his own personal interests and to actively build a massive, highly secure, and deeply successful future for himself. The entire modern world ultimately belongs exclusively to those sharp, calculating individuals who deeply know and masterfully manipulate the hidden rules of this grand corporate game. And now that you have finally heard all of these powerful hidden laws, you are officially one of those highly dangerous and incredibly capable individuals too. Kyle is already standing exactly one massive step entirely ahead of absolutely everyone else in this ruthless competitive environment. So now the ultimate choice is entirely yours to make, because it is finally your move on the great corporate chessboard.